I graduated from the School of Beaux-Arts in Paris in 1971, so just after 68. At this time, learning architecture was a big priority. And when I finished studying at the School of Beaux-Arts in 71, because of this, I decided to go to Harvard University and MIT in Boston. My name is Jean-Paul Viguier. I'm the founder of the studio, Viguier Architecture, and this is the Architect's Chairs. So I went to America and I spent 2 years in Harvard. It was a kind of shock for me, of course, because of the international aspect of architecture. Students and professors were coming from around the world. What I found in America, particularly at MIT, was a fully open system. The Department of Architecture at MIT, for instance, in city planning, was next to electrical engineering, next to psychology. I had a school of cinema. You have this discussion all the time with people you are not used to meet usually, and I found this incredibly rich and interesting and exciting to have this exchange between people that were not in the same discipline as mine. So after that, the office started. It was in the 75. And it started with a project which is built now, and it's the National Center for Meteorology in Toulouse. So the office started like this. The first project I got was a huge project. And this, when I think about it now, it's something which is strange because I thought it was normal, in fact. People say, no, you should have started by refurbishing an apartment, then we have a house still, the friends of yours to build. We have different stages. And life has made that I've started by the top of the system. At the time, Mitterrand chose AMP for the pyramid of the Louvre. And so at the time, people were saying to Mitterrand, okay, what you do is nice for architecture, but you should also consider that France is not only Paris, you have other cities, it's a large country. And he says, okay, I'm going to do that. And he created a Secretary of State. And Mr. Biasini has been appointed minister. And Biasini came back to Mitterrand with the Pont du Gard project. He said, there is something to do because the situation is not anymore acceptable. And so he started another competition, architecture competition, to refurbish that side. And this time I won the competition, but I had to go with the Romans. Unfortunately, he had done that because this project has been very much attacked by the people. The people didn't want us to do anything on that side. And without the support of the state, we would never have achieved this project.
The Pont du Gard project covers a wide area. It's not just work on the Gallo-Roman bridge built some 2,000 years ago. It's a much broader project aimed at transforming the whole area in question and bringing as many visitors to the area as possible. So not just enhancing the natural landscape, but also underlining its cultural value. So the aim was to introduce other facilities on the site that would attract tourists and the general public. So the first job on the site was to identify places that could be connected by a series of distribution circuits that would link various facilities built on the site as a function of the Roman aqueduct. So the area was dotted with various projects. We designed a Roman history museum on the site built with stones found in basements in the area. And afterwards, in the original quarry, mined to build the aqueduct. With these, we built a structure able to contain an auditorium.
The project in Namur, it's a very good example. There was a lot of work that was done with local players, with local stakeholders. They had a definite impact on the way we perceive the public spaces and the way the project interacts with the public spaces.
Our firm engages with the important issue of accessibility and the social integration of the entire population of cities, thanks to railway and infrastructure projects.
And so the building started with a mixed-use program, but very quickly it opened up to go and to have a direct impact on the public spaces. And following the development of the project, we had a lot of workshops with local authorities and with neighborhood representatives. And that gave us a lot of clues about how the city itself works and the projects that were going on around the project. And so there was like an extra porosity that had to be developed to connect the interior of the building with the city. So the whole organization of the plan is really based on 3 points that go search the public spaces and attach the building to the larger urban fabric.
Et je vois pas mal comment on pourrait amener des commerces quand même sur le plateau là en fait. Si tu animes chaque socle.
This was the largest project ever built in Europe. It was 350,000 square meters of construction office block. It was incredibly huge project, and I won a competition for that. Coeur Défense project, heart of La Défense. And then this art has opened for me, for the office, a new era of projects, not only in France, but over the world. And for instance, it has shown that I was qualified to take care of towers, for instance, because this requires a special experience, I tell you. For Coeur Défense, I was thinking of Hector Berlioz, because he is the composer, which is just at the limit of the classical period, and is at the edge of the modern times. It's classical, but it announces modernity. So Coeur Défense is Hector, and it's powerful. Hector Berlioz was power of the music.
Coeur Défense is a project at La Défense, which is the neighborhood where towers can be built today in France. La Défense is sited on the historic axis that connects the Great Arch with the Louvre. The project comprises several buildings, not just one tower. The innovative feature of this project is that the building is made up of 2 large twin towers, approximately 180 meters high, and 3 low-rise buildings linked by a 44-meter-high atrium. A key characteristic of the Twin Towers is their very slender shape. That's because, in fact, unlike the monolithic structures built at the time, this was one single building divided into 2. The 2 buildings were connected by a bridging element called an intertower. This core intermediate element acts as the key bracing structure sustaining the building. It also contains the elevators, which were open to natural daylight, which was a novelty feature for the time when the building was constructed. In fact, it was this that allowed us to refine the towers. Since the building's core was not in the building, we had fewer structural elements to deal with. As a result, we were able to free up the office floor slab surfaces as much as possible.
The Aurore Tower was the sixth tower built in La Défense in 1970. The La Défense quarter at that time was not laid out as it is today, with the different squares in front of the various towers. So we redesigned everything that surrounded the tower to make it more accessible to the public. And after that, we addressed the building itself. It was a very heavy structure with very large, thick spandrels. These had to be completely dismantled, which allowed us to add 6 more floors without having to alter the original frame. When first constructed, the buildings at La Défense were no higher than 100 meters. This tower was no exception and fitted that mold. 100 meters tall, 24 meters wide, and 50 meters deep. So it wasn't very large. We were able to give it a modern makeover, redesigning all the facades and raising the heights of the various floors. The facade was given a much more modern look with the creation of operable windows. Today, this is a feature we try to introduce in all our projects, in everything we do. We try to insert openings at every level of our towers. It's something that characterizes the typology of our towers.
The Majunga Tower is along the same lines as the Coeur Défense. In other words, a very slender structure. Here, however, it was in a very tight space. Hence the idea of renovating the image of the towers of La Défense by working on the building's form. The building is made up of 3 segments whose different shapes diverge one from the other, giving it a dynamic appearance.
You see the system of the loggias. It's 1 out of 2 floor to the top, and you see the movement of the slices that does that. If you talk about music, it would be like different voices in the music. You see that they make one single partition of music, but in fact they sing something different. Each one sings something different. See, and when they sing together, it makes a music.
There was also the idea of including lodges in the towers that would create voids in the volume and take light into the heart of the building. The other innovation was the idea of opening the windows, something that had never been done before on these towers. As a result, every occupant can now open a window, feel the air, hear the noise and what's going on outside. This applies both to people opening a window or going out onto a loggia.
What I like here is the lightness of the building. You see, it's like if there is some kind of communication in between the inside and the outside. There are this complexity of the musical lines that play together, but they have some kind of independence to each other. And you have the invention of different details, something that comes all the time, so a detail somewhere. And I spoke about Bill Evans, the pianist, because of the creation and because of the improvisation. And this tower is very interesting because considering the hour of the day you come, it's always different. To me, this type of fresh approach of jazz, creative, never the same, something that you never heard about before.
Pour moi, l'équivalent, c'était celui avec l'école.
Et avec ça, ça va, tu l'as?
Au niveau des légendes.
La population, la
A
société.
population, society itself, survives by constantly adapting to the evolution of that society. That's the case with our own approach as a firm. In other words, we are always a step ahead. We're also ahead as far as data analysis is concerned. We are interested in artificial intelligence. We work with study groups that are investing enormously on the use of big data, which allows cross-referencing of economic, social, and environmental data, and which, put together, provide indicators on how to manage them. And this affects how we conceive out projects. We always try to develop projects in line with the evolution of society.
We start with introducing into housing new systems of climatization, heating systems, new energies, new insulation systems, taking into account the climate, orientation, winds, that type of thing. We have designed a project in Marseille. We took Marseille because Marseille is a city where the climate conditions are particularly rough. And we have used artificial intelligence to deal with the hundreds, not to say the thousands of the different parameters that we put into the project. And it is being a very nice experience. And when you want to achieve the goals that you have mentioned at the level of an area or district, a new quartier, a new place, the complexity becomes enormous. So artificial intelligence is a great help because it classifies the things, it sorts out the different solutions and proposals that you want to pick up. It helps you to make a decision, and also it explains to the client why you have chosen, why you propose that solution rather than another one.
I think that is also part of our role to push the boundaries, to integrate, to develop technologies that are of general use, but also that are specially developed for different projects. The Data Valley is actually part of a larger project which includes what we call the Data Village. It's the first project in a very large development area that we call a ZAC in France, in La Beige, in the south of Toulouse. We call it an office building, but it's not really a typical office building. In order to develop the project and to draw it, we really exchanged a very long time with the future users. We were mainly startups and scale-ups that were dedicated to the Internet of Things. The lower levels, they're very largely glazed facades that open to the public space. The intermediate spaces are on the following floors. There are continuous office spaces where people can work and be in contact with other startups. And then when you keep going up, you have 3 floors that are a lot more confidential. There are smaller spaces and they all have an exterior space that is adjacent to the working place. So we push this idea that we push very often in our office buildings, that is to conceive a building in a way that accentuates serendipity. So people, just by luck, they meet somebody at the coffee break on the stairs and they have the opportunity to exchange and talk, rather than if they had stayed in a normal office and they wouldn't go out and they just take an elevator to go up and down.
The so-called archipel. Why the Vinci Company's archipel? Because it's not simply a tower, it's a conglomeration of several buildings. The complex houses all the companies belonging to the Vinci Consortium, hence the idea of several buildings all connected together. We developed a system of working by blocks. For example, there are low-rise buildings that have an expressive language which will then be found on the tower. We worked more on achieving the right juxtaposition of the blocks rather than concentrating on developing a single slender tower. Likewise, we redesigned the common spaces both on the exterior as well as on the interior. We inserted lodges and operable windows on all floors and in all the buildings. Another interesting thing about this project is that the tower is not a building unto itself, apart from the others, but rather connected to other buildings. In addition, all the community spaces are connected by what is called a Vinci Street on the 2nd and 6th floors. An enormous effort was also put into innovation, both in terms of sustainable development, but also the technology installed. Very many technologies were developed or enhanced for this building. We're talking very low carbon and reversible floor panels that use either air or water systems.
The increasing of the density. So that's for the architects is something very difficult to face, because the density for the inhabitants that are already in cities is contemplated as a problem. They say, we don't want you to increase the density in my vicinity. Don't add more buildings around me. That's okay.
Recently, we started to work on mixed-use project, which is basically kind of building small villages or more cities inside the city. I thought that the idea really made sense. I always thought that the city grows organically. It has a reason why it develops like that, because it provides to the user the needs as they go through time.
And then you talk about architecture, and you talk about also what you are going to do, creating new terraces, opening gardens to the public. So it's not the building that you bring into an urban environment, it's a new environment by itself.
The Muse project in Metz, it's an interesting project, and it was one of the early mixed-use projects that we did in the office. What is interesting about the Muse project is that we had a mission to coordinate all the architects that worked on the project. So the project is composed of a base that is about 50,000 square meters of retail and leisure, upon which we have projects that share a large common landscape roof. And we had the opportunity to work on the base of the project and to work on two of the projects that are on top of it, which are actually residential projects. And we had the task of coordinating all the architects that were working on it, which was quite a pioneering project at the time, because there were not that many examples of it. And interestingly enough, even from the rules and regulation point of view, there was no real example for it. So there was a lot of things that had to be invented or they had to be discussed with the authorities directly in order to find new solutions that were not really already in use.
What you do when you design has all the time to be anticipating about what is going to happen as much as possible. So there is kind of future dimension in architecture, the fact that you are always in advance in terms of designing compared to the completion of the product of what you have designed. So the future is something which you deal with all the time, architecture. So you have to prepare yourself. And what you do today has to think about what is going to happen in 5 years from now in terms of climatological change, for instance. And don't be afraid about complexity. If you don't know how to deal with complexity, find the tools like artificial intelligence that will help you to solve the problems that you cannot solve by yourself. You have to prepare yourself, you have to prepare your teams also for these new challenges that we have to face in the future. And that's why here at this office you will see that a new generation of architects is going to take over. Most of them have been working with me for many years, so we share something in common. We share the same passion for architecture, we share some ideas, some approaches, and of course we have different culture also. That's what makes the interest of this group. So this international dialogue is very rich in exchanges and in our capacity to face difficult situations and to propose adequate solutions, and also to understand complex people.